Welcome to episode 365 of the DFO Rundown, brought to you by Bet365. Better have a good episode today. Download the app, use the promo code NATION to get in on a huge range of markets, whatever the moment. It's never ordinary at Bet365. I'm Jason Gregor. We welcome in Frank Saravalli. And Frank, the dust has settled. People have had a few days to chew over the trade deadline.
Thank God.
Man, some of the biggest stories is the trade that didn't happen. The Mitch Marner and the Maple Leafs and Carolina, and seeing if Mitch Marner would waive his clause. Like, I can understand why Carolina would be interested. What do you think this does, if anything, for the Marner Maple Leafs renegotiation?
I think what it's done is taken tensions to a new level. Now, Brad Treliving can come out and say, yeah, we're in lockstep with Mitch and we're on the same page and we want him to be a Maple Leaf for a very long time. And Mitch Marner can say, I only want to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Okay, so where's the disconnect then? If you want him long-term and he wants to be there long-term, why don't you have a deal done already?
It's a good question. Well, let's be honest. I think we all know the answer, don't we?
Yeah, I think the Leafs need to wait until they see what happens in the playoffs, which by then is the worst case scenario. Or, I mean, I guess depends on how you look at it. But let's say Marner has a monster playoffs and the Leafs break through. How much more is it going to cost you now?
Honestly, I don't think it should be much, if I'm being frank. Like, look what Rantanen signed for. Look what Pasternak signed for.
Well, now that's the argument that people are going to make and say, well, Mikko Rantanen got 8 times 12. That's 96. Mitch Marner can't ask for a penny more than that. I just don't think that's accurate. Two different market conditions. Rantanen in a closed market vacuum on Friday, one team and one team only at that point in time. And they've held firm on their number. They said, this is the number. We're not budging. If you want to come here and play for the Dallas Stars, this is what we're willing to pay you. If Mitch Marner goes to market, it only takes free agency. The market itself is much different. It's open competition. All it takes is one team to go $14 million and he's set.
Yeah.
13.5. And someone will, just to pay the extra premium to get their hands on a difference maker like that. So I don't think the two things are comparable.
You honestly think someone would pay Marner $13.5 million?
Yes. Just to get him, because you can't find players like that. If you're, let's just, and I'm not saying he's going to go to any of these places, but if you're Utah, or if you are Chicago, or if you are a team you want to add a true difference maker, how else are you going to get him?
Yeah, there's not a lot of the superstars who are up. Not that
they almost never make it to market. And if they do, they're like 30 years old.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be a fascinating one to see. Now, if you're Mitch Marner, and you could take the money, but now Utah is different because I think they're going to be a competitive team moving forward. But, you go signing someone like, ask Seth Jones how it was signing a team that then suddenly is not a good team. It ain't that much fun.
Closed market. Seth Jones was traded from Columbus to Chicago as an RFA.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about signing his contract of $9.5 million. Like, could Mitch Marner get a lot of money from Chicago? Yes, but they're not going to be competitive is my point. It's not about the market. It's just about, do guys at that point, if you make $96 million or $100 million or $104 million, your quality of life doesn't change, right? But your enjoyment of the game changes a lot if you're on a competitive team or a not competitive team.
And I think that's where Rantanen got to in the end. Was A, I want this to be over, and B, I'm going to a great place with other Finns, with a team that's had an authentic chance to win, Cup final, multiple conference final appearances. Why not the Dallas Stars?
Now, when you look at Rantanen, Frank, why was this contract or something similar not agreed upon in Colorado?
That's the question that a lot of Avs fans are asking today. And the true answer to that is that the Colorado Avalanche weren't willing to go to $12 million a year. I think in the end, his last communication with Colorado, I was told, was they were offering in the 11.5 range or 11.6. And he said to them, you know what? I know we've been asking for 14, but if we could get to 12, that'll get the deal done. And I was told he was traded the next day.
Wow. Just seems that just seems a miss to me. Like, if you're willing to go 11 and a half, you're going to go 12 for a guy like Rantanen. Like, that just seems odd to me.
I'm with you. Like, with the quality of player, I think in the end, the calculus for the Colorado Avalanche was we don't want to pay this many players that high of an AAV, because in the near future, they're going to have to pay Cale Makar again. And obviously McKinnon's contract is on the books for a while. How do you manage that and keep a deep team? They've seen other teams struggle and they didn't want to be in that position.
Yeah, like Makar's already making 9. Yeah, and like the cap's going up that much. Makar makes 9 for a few. By the time his contract is up, Frank, the cap's going to be what, 110, 118? Like, yeah,
I'm with you. Like, it's not anything that it's not how I would have structured it, but this is really what the Leafs and any other team are going to have to ask themselves this summer. Are we better off giving 2 forwards $6 million apiece, or 7 and 5, or 8 and 4 versus 1 forward 12? That's really what it comes down to. Are the Colorado Avalanche better with Marty Necas at 6.5 and Charlie Coyle at 5.25, or are they better with Mikko Rantanen at 12? That's what it comes down to, really.
Yeah. Let's stick with the Avs and talk about their team. Like, obviously they got Brock Nelson. They made the Casey Middlestad for Charlie Coyle trade. Now that the dust settled, what do you make of the Avs? And then you look at their roster now.
Well, I think the big question to ask is, are the Colorado Avalanche better now than they were pre-Rantanen deal? So out is Mikko Rantanen and Casey Middlestat, as well as Cal Ritchie,
who wasn't playing, but yeah.
But okay,
yeah, good player.
Should be playing in the playoffs. I'm just doing this on the fly, so if
it's Marty Necas, Drury, Nelson, Coyle, Ryan Lindgren, sorry,
and Eric Johnson.
Yeah, although,
if you think about it, Colorado's changed out almost half of their roster. Oh, no. Yeah.
And both goalies this year, too.
That's what I mean. It's like quite literally like 10 or 11 out of 23 guys.
Yeah.
Are they better now? I think I would argue that they are. And certainly down the middle, they are. If you
down
go
the middle,
McKinnon,
sure.
Nelson, and Coyle, that's pretty strong.
Yeah, I like their top 3 centers for sure.
Even Jack Drury as your 4C.
Yeah, to me, if you still had Rantanen, but you also had Nelson and you had Charlie Coyle, which you easily could have still done, right? If you didn't make the Rantanen trade for Necas and you signed it for $12 million, he's not hitting your cap till next year. It's still probably like that. I like Marty Necas. He's just not Rantanen in my eyes. That's all.
Well, they've unlocked something again in Marty Necas though, because he's got 16 points in 15 games as an Av.
Yeah.
And he's playing McKinnon minutes, 21 minutes and 34 seconds a night in 15 games.
Well, he can fly.
Flat out, are the Avs better or worse?
Overall, I think their team is better, yes. But it's because of the other moves, too. It's not just the Rantanen deal. I think it's the Coyle and the Nelson moves. We all knew going in they needed to strengthen their middle, and they have a lot, right? Like that's going to be a war, Frank, unless Dallas can catch Winnipeg. That Dallas-Colorado first-round series, oh my goodness, that's going to be epic.
But that's why it's a nightmare. And look, that's the risk you take when you move a player like that, but that he ends up back in your division and blocking you for the next 9 playoff runs is pretty scary.
Yeah.
I think the Nelson trade was the single biggest shock of the deadline, of the 48 hours around the deadline.
Because Cal Ritchie?
Yes. They gave up a ton for 1 playoff run of Brock Nelson. And you can re-sign him, obviously, but
yeah,
that's a lot. Cal Ritchie and a first. Like, there are teams that were furious when they saw that trade on Thursday night. because they've been calling and asking about Cal Ritchie for months and months. And to have him go in that deal with a first for a rental, that part was very surprising. Now, I know someone's going to say, come on, man, you don't think the Marchand deal is more surprising? I think seeing Cal Ritchie included, there were a ton of teams that called about Brock Nelson. And two things. One, they were told that it was pretty uncertain that Brock Nelson would waive to go to Canada. And two, it never got that far because Lou Lamoriello told every team, no disrespect, but you're not going to beat the offer that I have on the table. And he was not kidding. So now Brock Nelson gets reunited with Devon Taves, obviously a buddy from the Islanders that has gone there and had tons of success. And now Brock Nelson gets to chase the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, I'm kind of, well, it is a lot. I think the fact that, Richie's involved, I think the Avs are pretty confident they're going to be able to re-sign Brock Nelson, right? That's, to me, that's my first inclination was, well, they obviously feel they can re-sign him, right? The Landeskog, we've been talking about it now, Frank, for it's coming up on 3 years. It's, I just don't see it happening. Good for him. I hope it does if it ever does, but I don't think they can wait anymore.
What if Cal Ritchie's the next Patrice Bergeron? I'm just saying, like, that's the level of intelligence. That's the level of intelligence that we're talking about with this prospect. Like, cannot miss. I'm telling you, he can't miss.
Well, to be Patrice Bergeron would be pretty amazing. Like, that's a pretty high bar.
But that's the risk that you're taking, trading a 20-year-old. That's what you're doing.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Plus the first for a rental? You don't think that's a stiff price to pay?
Oh, no, it's a very stiff price. I think
Cal Ritchie straight up for Brock Nelson was probably an overpay as it was.
Wow. Hey, I'll give Lou a lot of credit, right? Like, give him credit. He got a good prospect that can help them next season. And then he got a draft pick for the future because the Islanders need a lot of help here. Let's call a spade a spade. Like I'm actually surprised they didn't move Kyle Palmieri, to be honest, on top of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing is I think they probably felt like they got so much for Brock Nelson that they said, maybe we can roll the dice with Palmieri now.
Yeah, but
they're going to re-sign him. I mean, they had made significant progress on a deal by Friday, enough to know that they're going to get something done.
Yeah. I just want, like, moving out Brock Nelson's great, but I just still look at the Islanders and I'm like, unless they're going to have significant changes in the offseason, Frank, to me, it's just, you're going to roll back the same team next year. Like, how are they better? So that's it for me. Now, another trade, Frank, that,
wait, what about, you want to talk about the Carolina end of this?
Yes. Like hey, you asked about, is Colorado better Rantanen trade? Well, is Carolina better pre-Rantanen trade? I think we all know the answer. No.
Well, are they better now versus pre-Rantanen trade? My argument would be yes.
Drury. Yeah.
Yeah, my answer would be yes. I think
they are.
I would take Stankoven over Natchez.
Really?
Would you?
No, not yet.
Not yet, but here's the other part of the calculus is Marty Natchez only had 1.5 years left on his deal and they weren't going to pay him. So would you trade, this is what the real equation is. Would you trade Marty Natchez, 1.5 years of Marty Natchez for Logan Stankoven under team control? That's the real answer.
Yeah. But here's the thing. Like, I don't think they're better today because Stankoven isn't better today. He might be down the road. I agree. But when I talk about today,
that's fair. You're right.
Yeah. Right. Like, so when I look at Carolina going into the playoffs now, like I said it, I think Washington's the biggest winner in the East in the trade deadline. New Jersey got decimated by injuries and Carolina got worse. They got the easiest path to the conference final.
Man, Jack Roslovic's still the biggest winner of that trade.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
He gave up his number 96 for 14 games and got a rollie out of it. I mean, and then the day after Rantanen's gone, boom, back to wearing 96 again. Let's go. I love that he just showed up at the rink. Yeah, I'm 96. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, why not? So I look at the Canes and what do you make of the whole situation for the Canes And was it worth it for you in your eyes? Say you got to take a big swing at some point, and they did, and it didn't work out, but they took the swing.
It is for me because I think that's how it should work. I think if you're not being aggressive, what's the point? And I absolutely loved the quote from Eric Tulsky, and I want to read it in full in case anyone missed it. This is how he opened his press conference on Friday or Saturday after the deals. Quote, "Our organization is characterized by an aggressive approach. Our forecheck tries to put pressure on. Our defensive zone coverage tries to be aggressive. On and off the ice, we want to be aggressive whenever we can. Being aggressive means taking some risks. It means taking some chances. If you only make moves when you're 100%, you know exactly how it's going to work out. You're going to miss some opportunities to make the team better. That's not what we want to do. If the team was already winning cup after cup after cup, maybe that would be a time to be conservative, but we haven't gotten where we want to be yet. So we need to keep taking chances and trying to push things forward. Ultimately, that means you're taking some risks. When you're bringing in a player like Mikko, the upside of having that work out long-term is worth that risk in my mind. Obviously, we didn't want it to end with him being traded away. That wasn't the goal, but that trade allowed us to bring in other pieces that will help us. It brings in a player who is going to be a long-term fit for us, who plays like he was born to be a Carolina Hurricane, and it brings a lot of draft capital to help us reloading to keep the team going forward. Ultimately, that's a fit with how we want to run this organization, and we're comfortable with the way that it ended up." So Eric Tulsky, guy completely comfortable in his own skin. Tom Dundon, same thing as owner. If you're not going to take the bat off your shoulder and make a swing, like acquiring a soon-to-be free agent in Mikko Rantanen in January, like, what's the point? And I get that some people might listen to that and say, okay, but if you're really interested in taking risks, then you would have just kept him for the playoffs and seen what happens. And I think in the end, when you get a player that says what he did to you, which is the quote that Eric Tulsky used was, "This didn't feel like home for him." And Rod Brindamore said that when Rantanen got there, that essentially he determined that that wasn't a fit for him. You can't, and you look at the production, slough off the way that it did, even though the underlying numbers were great. I don't know that you can say, oh, this is a good enough predictor of success for us in the postseason to want to not get back what they got back. Fair or unfair?
Oh, I think to me, compounding, and it's not a mistake, but you would have compounded your loss by just trying to say, okay, you know what? Things are going to change. We're going to make Mikko really happy here. They knew what you just outlined. The organization knew. And Rantanen, I'll give him credit, was honest enough to say, hey, guys, like, this just isn't for me. And that's okay. That's his right. So it's Carolina then says, okay, you know what? This isn't how we wanted, but let's make it up. So they get a young player in Stan Coben. They get 2 picks. And because you never would have got that package for Natchez and Drury, right? So
the best offer for Natchez last summer was 2 second-round picks.
Yeah, well, that's last summer before he had.
I know, but so he had a great start to his year. You cash in while his value's high, and you go Natchez, Jack Drury, who is an easily replaceable player, and a second-round pick for the right to roll the dice with Rantanen. So you took a guy that only had 2 second-round pick value, basically makes it 3 second-round picks and Jack Drury for the right to try out Mikko Rantanen. I don't know about you, but with the ilk of that player, I'm taking that risk every single time.
Oh, yeah. And we all knew, anybody who's watched the Hurricanes has known what they've missed. They've missed a real difference maker at a key time in the playoffs.
So they got him.
Yeah, exactly. So they tried it. It didn't work. So it tells me, I think that they'll probably be even aggressive again. Now, as we've alluded to, there's not a ton of those guys that are available in signings all the time, but there might be another one in trades. And you know what? They're going to show their players, hey, we're not afraid to take a swing. And because some said, well, the players are going to be upset. I'm like, I don't think so. I think players look at it realistically and said, hey, if the guy didn't want to be here, we can't change that. But at least our manager tried to make our team better.
I mean, people look at the Carolina Hurricanes now and say, oh, what a group of weenies. They had this player, and instead of trying to win championships, they're just trying to collect draft picks and prospects. And I just don't think that it can be viewed in an all or nothing standpoint, not when 31 teams fail every year. The odds that it's going to be your team this year with Rantanen, and then everyone is happy, are infinitesimally small. Like you're talking, what's their realistic odds to win a Stanley Cup with Rantanen? 6%, 7%, on the high end, maybe 10. Would you take a 10% shot just to see how it works out with a guy who's telling you to your face that I'm never re-signing here?
No. The fact that he told him, I think, is good. I think to me that gives him some credit. Hey, I got to be honest, and there can't be any ill will. And Carolina could be like, hey, we're disappointed, but hey, it's not you, it's me, whatever. Like it's better to break up and be honest than just stick in it for 3 months and then wait till it's more painful. All right. Like that's just a reality of relationships. So I respect Rantanen for doing it. I respect the Hurricanes for getting a good deal. But I will say their team, I don't view them as a legit contender now.
Maybe before this trade, though, we didn't really view them as a legit.
No, I agree with you 100%. That's why the trade makes even more sense for me.
Do you know what Carolina's final offer was for Rantanen?
12.5.
8 times 14.
Ooh.
So no one can say, oh, cheap organization, didn't put money on the table, wasn't ready and willing to pay him. There was no negotiating hardball here. I think they started at 12.6 and got their way up to 14, and it wasn't about money in the end.
Well, I've said that all along, Frank, that when you're making that much money as a player, it comes down to who you think's the fit. There's very few guys. Like I could see guys, Jordan Greenway, for instance. You get a contract like that, you're like, yeah, I don't care if we're not going to win. I just made $8 million, and I don't think I was ever coming close to that. That's different than a guy who was making 96 or he's going to make 104. At the end of the day, it ain't going to matter. His family for the next how many generations are set if they're smart with their money.
Well, and now the exciting part if you're Carolina is we have a ton of prospects, including Nikishin, who's going to make it, if they play long enough this year, make his NHL debut. And they've got now 2 extra first-round picks and 2 extra third-round picks, in addition to Stankoven, who's under team control.
And don't you think, Frank, they've already, even though they're not allowed to negotiate with them, it's pretty clear now that Mitch Marner knows the Carolina Hurricanes would gladly have him on their team.
Yeah, but the problem with that is he said no specifically to Carolina. And that's really what the issue was with this no trade.
Now, do you think he said no because of the timing of it?
But no, I think he just said, no, I'm not going to Carolina. That's what I was told.
Okay.
So, I mean, look, where that Marner situation goes from here, I think they can say whatever they want, but if these two sides were really aligned on him wanting to be elite for the long term, it's easy to get it done now. And if you say, oh, I'm not negotiating now, then you're not staying true to what you want, or what you're telling us you want, I should say. Yeah. So, and by the way, I said to you before, the Canes called on Mitch Marner before trading for Mikko Rantanen.
Yeah.
That was their target. And so here's how it worked out in the last 48 hours or so before the deadline. Of the teams that Rantanen said that he would be willing to sign a long-term extension with, the list was Dallas, Florida, and Toronto. And the Canes asked for Marner for Rantanen straight up. And when that didn't work, they were, I'm sure, talking with Dallas the entire time, but there was some thought out there that maybe Carolina is going to shoot for a roster player from Dallas as opposed to futures. There was some talk that it was going to be Nick Robertson that was going to Carolina. Not Nick Robertson. Jason Robertson.
Jason Robertson.
Excuse me. Oh. I had Toronto in my brain, and I was thinking Robertson, and I said Nick. Jason Robertson going to from Dallas to Carolina. And if you kind of think about the way Dallas's cap is structured, you could see why they might have to offload a larger salary at some point, given the other guys that they still need to pay, which, by the way, huge bonus to getting this Rantanen deal done. I don't think they could really even get the deal done until they got an extension done and some cost certainty with Wyatt Johnson. Wyatt Johnson also happens to have the same agent as Mikko Rantanen, which made that one-stop shopping as they were piecing all this together. So Dallas, I think you could make the argument Dallas has the best top 9 in the game right now. And what Toronto offered to Carolina, they're floored that Carolina didn't take that deal. Cowan, Minton, and 2 first-round picks. Now, I get it from Carolina's perspective. If I'm already getting 2 first-round picks, I want the roster player in Stankoven that has demonstrated he can play at the NHL level, as opposed to 2 maybes or likelies in Cowan and Minton. What about you?
100%. Yes. I still believe there's lots of people that I would love to go, and you can read it, at times the over evaluation of young players boggles my mind, right? Like, people will pump out stuff about a player. Like, they wanted to call Connor Bedard generational before he's ever played a game in the NHL. It was idiotic. It's too much pressure on a player. And now if he isn't generational, he's not that good. Why? Because you were a moron and you incorrectly labeled him something that he wasn't. And there's lots of players and organizations that are good, Frank, but we've seen tons of guys who are like, they become NHLers, but they're not big time producers. Like, to think that, any of these players will be as good as Mikko Rantanen ever is like a pipe dream, to be honest. Like, Mikko Rantanen's probably a Hall of Famer. Like, it's hard.
He's a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Yeah. So, like, Stankoven's a really good player. I like him. But Mikko Rantanen is 6'3", 220 pounds, and like Stankoven's 5'8". Like, God, I love him, but let's not compare the two. And it's not a knock on Stankoven. I just like to I always would rather have a realistic expectation of a player and have him overachieve it than have a player come in and rank him so high. Oh, he's great. And then, 3 years into his career, he's not great. Well, now he's a dud. And that happens way too often.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. So I get how Carolina ended up where they did. Dallas.
That's a good trade.
Dallas works and grinds it out. They get the deal done after playing a little bit of hardball with Rantanen. And in the end, Colorado comes out. I mean, aside from the fact that they could have just gotten it done with Rantanen and kept it simple, they come out looking okay too. Everyone was kind of just a little bit unhappy, except for Dallas, who gets the player that they want. But Colorado's just a little bit unhappy because they have to trade away a player like Rantanen. Rantanen's a little unhappy. He had to move twice. I think that's like 5 jerseys he's now worn over the last 6 weeks, if I'm counting correctly. Colorado, Finland, Carolina, Dallas, 4. Excuse me. That's a lot. And the Canes are a little bit unhappy because they wanted to get the true game breaker and difference maker that for years we've been bashing them over not having. They go out and get him, and then he's falling through their hands like sand.
Yeah, that was a tough one. The interesting thing to me will be Dallas. They've already got like $92 million in cap space committed to next year, and they only got 8 forwards signed. Like, Jim Nill's going to have to wheel and deal something because, Jamie Benn needs a contract. Matt Duchene needs a contract. Some of those guys, Granlund, they just can't afford them all, right? Who else?
And that's why I was thinking that Rantanen might not be a fit, but
yeah. Well, they worried about it, and they'll say, hey, well, if we have to move a guy or 2 guys in the summertime, because there's lots of teams that have cap space now, Frank. So, it makes sense to me. Dallas they're going to have an interesting summer. Some guys are getting moved out of Dallas. Just the salary cap says they have to. So
what's that next Thomas Harley contract going to cost?
Woo! But he's a good player, man. He is I really just saw him on Saturday night in Edmonton, and with Heiskin out of the lineup, he played 26 minutes a night, and man, he's so mobile. He's a hell of a player. So I like watching him. Hey, let's talk. Now, it's a big name trade for sure, and he made his first press conference earlier this morning saying the red brings out his eyes. But Brad Marchand, fun guy, good quote, ends up going to Florida for a second that's got conditions that could become a first. Obviously, Frank, this one kind of reads, hey, Marchand obviously held the cards on where he wanted to go. Boston said, okay, you know what, we'll help you out. And away he went. What do you make of this deal? And kind of what did you make? Let's start with Florida and then transfer into what we think the Bruins did at the deadline.
Well, an unbelievable pickup for Florida. I mean, it's as good as it gets. You get to add this player for a relatively minimal cap hit and a relatively minimal price. And then you add Seth Jones before, who I think fits in like a glove. And it's not just because of the lower cap hit. It's because the pressure's off now. He doesn't have to be the guy anymore. He's just going to blend in seamlessly. The record's really good since they got him. And by the way, the Blackhawks are 3-0-2 since the Seth Jones trade. Also points in 5 straight. But Marchand is the ultimate ad. He really is. For a team that has tons of juice and he can still play at a high level, I think the harder part for me to reckon with is, why did this make sense for the Boston Bruins? The Florida Panthers need to play till the conference final in order for you to get to a first round pick.
Right. Which is going to be hard.
No, well, it's going to be a challenge for sure. Obviously, back-to-back trips to the final in one banner, like they've proven they can do it. But I think for that minimal of a return, what I'm struggling with is, why didn't they just keep him?
Fair point. I'm guessing they felt like it's time that they're going to turn things over in Boston. That's the only thing that makes sense. And maybe the player, Frank, because what if the player says, you know what? I want a chance to be competitive again. Do you owe it to, now that it's always a fine line, do you owe it to the players and organization to do it? Or do you keep him because you know when he's in your organization, he can help continue having a winning culture?
Well, you have to remember the other parts of this deadline for Boston. They traded Carlo and they traded Coyle and Brazeau and Frederick. Those are all pretty significant pieces.
Yeah, like the Brazeau trade, I really don't understand why they made that trade. He's young players, not making much money. Like,
he was a UFA, so that's why. I mean, he's a UFA that they weren't going to give a pay raise to. That's what it came down to. He double-digit goal scorer. He wants to double his pay or more, and they're like, yeah, no, not happening. Maybe part of it too is that he's hurt and that he's week to week. I know the Panthers were still waiting on an exact timeline. They had their doctors look at him on Saturday in Florida. So maybe by some standard, Marchand had already played. Like, let's say he's not coming back to the playoffs till the playoffs. Maybe he's already played his last game as a Bruin. So if we hang on to him into the offseason for him to leave anyway, maybe that was part of it. But I guess what I really struggle with is you mean to tell me that there wasn't a gap that could have been bridged to make this happen? So Marchand looking for a 3-year deal. How far apart could these two sides have possibly been that you couldn't find a way to make some progress at that?
Well, I guess it depends. Like, he wants 3 years, but at what AAV?
But that's what I'm saying. How big could the gap have been? I mean, I guess obviously pretty sizable, but how, like, are people entering with that disparity in realistic expectations?
Yeah.
And fair. I guess if I'm the Bruins, like we say all the time, it's not about winning press conferences. It's about winning Stanley Cups. And the Bruins have had arguably one of the best track records of success in this century.
Oh, dude, really. They've been the best. They have the most wins since I think 1995 or 6 in the NHL.
So they also have one Stanley Cup. They've been to a final. They've been to 2 other finals, I should say.
Yeah.
They lost to the Hawks and to the Blues. And so the track record of success is there. But if it's me, and again, just me, if we have such a disparity, and not to get in his way from having a chance to compete, I'm keeping him into the offseason, and I'm trying to figure out if we could chip away at this. And if in the end he ends up leaving anyway, that's fine. But at least make him look like the bad guy instead of you. Because that's what they look like to Boston fans.
Yeah, that's probably fair. Because the emotion gets to it, right? Like, Marchand was a fan favorite, and rightfully so.
And didn't want to leave.
Yeah. So it's, I'm very, now I will say this about Bill Zito, Frank, if Matthew Tkachuk doesn't get injured at Four Nations, lots of these trades in Florida aren't happening, right? Because he's not on LTIR.
None of these trades are happening.
Right. So you look at, there's a team that prior to the Four Nations, people were like, wow, they're probably not going to make much. They don't have a ton of space. And now they get Seth Jones, they get Brad Marchand, they get Vanasek in goal. Like, now I know he's a backup, but he did get a shutout his first game. So I look at Florida, and there's a GM that they're in win now mode, and you react quickly to something that happens, and you use it to your advantage.
Yeah, and they also added Nico Sturm to help their team down the middle, like another small acquisition. But because you have the cap space, it's not difficult for you to go out and trade a pick to get Nico Sturm.
No. Good player. No, I like Florida's deadline, man. But I'll say this, Frank. Look at Tampa Bay. Look at what they did. Look at what Florida did. And then Toronto. Like, that's going to be a war in the Atlantic, man. Like, first place is so important to win first, because you're avoiding those other two teams right away.
Someone is going to come away from that playoff feeling pretty stupid about what they did.
But do they, though? Because if we're going to give Carolina credit, to me, Florida's good. Tampa's good. Toronto's good. Like, I can understand why all those teams like, hey, I believe in our group, and if we add this, I think we got a good chance to win.
We say this about the deadline every year, and then no one ever sticks to it, which is sometimes it's not the big, sexy, splashy move. Like, again, the biggest thing that I want to keep drilling down on and coming back to, and not just suppress transactions. I want more juice. I want more Mitch Marner in conversations. But how realistically, how much did any of those teams change their Stanley Cup chances?
Oh, Florida, a lot, because of Seth Jones. Their defense.
Okay, but let's say they were at 7% before. What are they at now? How much does one player, when we've seen other teams losing a star player due to injury that go to the Cup final anyway and have a chance to win? The Penguins won a Cup without Chris Letang. How much does one player realistically change your chances to win?
Well, that's different, I think, in Pitt, because all their decor had, not all of them, but most of them had been there, so they had experience, good team. But I look at Florida, and I don't think Florida had I don't even think they were 7%, Frank. Florida, to me, because of losing Montour and Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who are so key to them, I don't think they realistically were a top 5 guy before these trades. I think Florida is now legit top 5, maybe top 3 or 4 favorite. And so I think it's worth it for them. Plus, Seth Jones, you get him for 5 years. That's a trade you got to make. That one wasn't just a rental, right? And like Marchand cost them, as we talked about, like a second, maybe a first. And if it's a first, it's because they're in the conference finals. So I actually really like the Florida trade, because like Seth Jones, you get him for 5 years, not just one run. You get him for 5.
Okay. So let's see. Let's just use moneypuck.com just for fun. So Florida's at 15.9% chance to win.
Okay.
I'd love to go back in time and see what it was as of before the trade.
Yeah, fair.
I mean, Dallas is at 10.6 now. Rantanen, we all agree, is a top 15 player in the league, right?
Yeah.
They're at 10.6. What were they at before? Toronto, 5.7. They traded away essentially 3 first-round picks.
Toronto's just in tough rank, because you got Tampa and you got Florida, and Vasilevsky's healthy again. Like, Tampa fans, they should be pretty confident in that team, man. Like, but I like them a lot.
The thing that helps Toronto, though, is both guys they went out and acquired are not rentals.
Yes.
Carlo's got multiple years. Scott Lawton has 1 more.
Yeah, that helps for sure. But
makes it digestible, at least, right?
If you rank those 3 teams today, who would you rank 1, 2, 3 in that division?
I would go Florida, Toronto, Tampa.
Really?
Yep.
Oof. Okay.
Assuming everyone's healthy, right? Like, we're assuming Matthew Tkachuk's playing.
I was just going to say, okay, so you assume Tkachuk's playing. Okay. I still might go Tampa Bay. Man, Vasilevsky's been unreal, and he's a difference. Kucherov point. I like the Hedman. I like their defense. Yeah, I'd probably go Tampa, Florida, Toronto.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's not like Bobrovsky's anything to sneeze at.
No. I just at Tampa Bay, man. Like I'd be leery of them. Toronto's just in tough. And Toronto's good, but they're just they probably wish somehow they could be in the Metro when the
Did
playoffs.
they now that we have a sober second thought, did they overpay to get Gordon Bjorkstrand?
Tampa Bay?
Yes.
I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say no because you get Bjorkstrand for 2 years. Hey, we talk about Carolina. I give Breezeball. I love what Breezeball had to say. And we got to get into McKinnon's comments too. You don't win with young players. I love that a player actually came out and said that. But Breezeball is like, hey man, I can compile all these draft picks. We're here to win, and we're here to win for a long time, and we'll worry about it. And there might be pain down the road.
What do you mean might be?
But the time there's pain, he ain't going to be there. So I get why they're like, guys, well, there's going to be pain either way, so we might as well go for it.
Okay, but this is a team that has lost in the first round each of the last 2 years.
Yeah, shows how hard it is to win.
Right, but what I'm saying is, obviously the core pieces are there to try and win a Stanley Cup. It's not the same team that did win a Stanley Cup for a lot of reasons, and they're older. It's 2021 that they last won the Cup, and 2022 that they got to the final and lost to the Avs.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, when at some point you're going to need to begin replenishing, ask the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Chicago Blackhawks and the LA Kings how much they regret chasing it in those last few years when it was at least clear to a lot of people that the window was closing. Yeah, now, you could make the argument, though, as you said, that, hey, the window is not closing. Look at this team this year. I just think I go back to our conversations that we were having in November-ish, December, saying, man, the Lightning only on pace for 94 points. Not great. They've been a steady decline, 105, 100, 110, 105, 98, 94. All of a sudden they go on an 8-game winning streak and everyone's like, oh my God, this team Cup favorite again. There's a whole dose of recency bias to it. And should the Blackhawks have started capitalizing on their first round picks sooner? Should the LA Kings, ask all these teams that were in that mode, when was enough? That's the big question when you're in a salary cap world, when it's cyclical.
Yeah. The difference that Tampa has done that those two teams didn't do, Frank, their GM doesn't make decisions based purely on emotion. He doesn't get the guys signed for long-term deals when he knows they're going to be past their prime, and he moves some of them out early. And Chicago and Pittsburgh didn't do that. And that's where I think the difference in Tampa Bay. Hey, they were willing. People are like, geez, why are you getting rid of Sergachev? And they get rid of other guys and they bring guys in and out and they don't mind. And I think if they continue to do that, that's why it keeps it open.
But why trade Sergachev? He's the one guy that fit your age scheme that could have been there on both sides of it.
But I think they looked at the deal and said, we needed McDonough. We want to be better defensively. And then they liked Moser a lot, right? Plus it freed up a little cap space to bring in other guys.
Yeah. I guess maybe it made sense to not take away from the team, but not add to it either. And just try and hit in the first round.
Yeah.
It's going to be, they don't have it. When's their next first round pick? 2028? I'm serious. When is it?
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, 2028. And well, I probably bet, Frank, it won't be 2028 either. I bet you they'll trade it.
No, I would bet that if they don't win, if they lose in the first round again this year, which again, look at the bracket, they very well may. If they lose in the first round again, at some point in the near future, whether it's in 2026 or in 2027, I guarantee you that they're trading pieces off their roster to get first round picks again.
Oh, that could happen. Yeah, could happen. But what if they win?
We'll guarantee you.
Well, what if they win?
What if? Only that's the calculus, though, that Tom Dundon seems to have said out loud that others still don't process. 31 teams fail every year. It's way stacked against you.
Yeah, but as Giannis said, do you consider it a failure, Frank? I don't consider it a failure just because we don't win. Only one team wins. Let's bring in Tyler Yaremchuk. Ty, how you doing?
I am good, boys. Ready to go. New edition of Buy or Sell brought to you by Bet365. Breaking news from our friends at Bet365, where every nail-biting overtime win is a barn burner. Every face-off, hat trick, power play, shot on goal, penalty shot, and every suspenseful minute in between is amazing. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary. At Bet365, an official partner of the NHL, download the app, use the promo code NATION to get in on the action. Frank, you were talking about the Money Puck pre-deadline numbers. So the Florida Panthers went from 13.6% to 15.9%. So a 2.3% jump. The Carolina Hurricanes, they fell. They are now at 6.8%, but coming into the deadline, they were all the way up at 15.1%. So there's really tanked versus the flip side, which was Florida's, who went up just 2.3%.
So just 2.3%.
Yeah, and Dallas
that's exactly what I thought it was. Low single-digit % chances that these trades actually end up impacting your chances to win.
Dallas went
from
8.9 to 10.6. So Dallas had a 2.7% jump getting Rantanen.
Again, 2.7% chance to get. That's what increased to get a top 15 player in the league.
Yeah,
it shows how hockey's ridiculously random.
Yeah,
the math is against you every time.
Let me start with
or that. I don't know if we can just say the math is without flaw. Like, can we let's not.
No, I think that math is exactly correct. If you think about each game in the playoffs as a series of 7 individual coin flips, which they more or less are, is the math really that flawed or effed up?
Yeah. I don't know. Like
we see 8 seeds beat 1 seeds regularly with regularity. It's bananas.
Yeah. I don't know about regularity, but yes, it happens.
Will happen. Yeah. All right. Well, let me just start with the Stanley Cup favorites then. Over on Bet365, the Florida Panthers are the standalone favorites. There's no tie atop the board. It is Florida, clear-cut #1. So, Greggs, I'll let you have the first word. You buy or sell on that. Florida, are they the Stanley Cup favorites?
I'm going to go no, because I'm going to base it on who they have to play and their track record and their path to get there. I just feel is pretty difficult. Now, I'm assuming that they feel Matthew Tkachuk will be ready for the postseason, which obviously is a big bonus for them, no question. And I love the Seth Jones thing. So I wouldn't have them one, not because I don't necessarily think they're good. I just think anybody in the Central or the Atlantic, I can't put as the #1 favorite because they just have the harder path.
Frank?
I'm going to go no as well. I mean, so how close is the next closest team?
It's Dallas at 6-1. So plus 500, plus 600. Then the Oilers are third at plus 750.
Where's Washington?
Washington is 5th at 10-1.
Okay, so now since we were just talking about Money Puck, let's now take Money Puck's odds and then display what they think the favorite should be. Florida 1, Winnipeg 2, Vegas 3, Washington tied with Dallas at 4, and then Carolina at 6. Tampa at 7, Toronto at 8, Colorado at 9.
So by that logic, the best value on the board is Winnipeg at 13-1 because they are tied for 7th on Bet365, 13-1.
I love 13-1 for the Jets.
I know their fan base is disappointed, but like,
I'm all about the juice. You know this. Like, if you're going to lay money down, like, it might as well be for a legit payoff.
Yeah.
5-1 to win the Stanley Cup. I don't care how good your team is. The randomness that we just talked about is not enough for me to do that.
Carolina ahead of Colorado and Edmonton after losing Rantanen. Get the hell out of here.
So Edmonton, believe it or not, on Money Puck is below the Rangers.
Which is crazy. Like, that's criminal to me. I like what the Oilers
is. It a possibility, guys, that maybe some of the numbers don't always tell you everything? I know. No, some people out there are like, well, you can never question the numbers. The math is always right. No,
that's not true. I agree with you. Yeah, you can always question the numbers. Just does anyone? Okay, we'll talk about the Oilers on the back end of this, but does anyone think that the Oilers? If the best player, top 15 player in the world gets you 2.7%, what did Jake Wallman and Trent Frederick get you? 0.1?
Oh, Jake Wallman, I think, is going to play a lot of minutes for them. I look at time on ice for guys.
I'm just saying, if that's what the math is, if we're ranking all the players in the league, are Jake Wallman and Trent Frederick in the 300s or 400s?
See, but I view that more as like the gap between who you had in that spot and now what you've added there. Like the gap from Klingberg to Wallman is substantial.
Okay.
And it's an important spot. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that Connor McDavid isn't going 11 games in a row without getting a 0.5 on 5. Like, he'll be a lot better down the stretch. You're starting to see it. The March McDavid is on again.
We'll talk about the Oilers maybe off the back. Next one I got for you guys, and this is always a thing around this time of year. It's like, oh, could a player just go back to where they were traded from? So, Frank, would you buy on either one? Marchand to Boston or Nelson back to New York? Would you buy on either one of those two happening in free agency?
No.
Double sell?
Double sell. There's zero chance that's getting put back in the bag in Boston. And why would you at this point if you're him? You already did the hardest part, which is walk in there today to a rival's locker room and put their gear on and stand in front of a microphone. That's the hardest part. After that, just another guy, part of the team. And your legacy that you left behind stays in Boston. And had they been closer, or had you said to them, hey, look, don't trade me, I want to stay here, that's different. But they parted ways, and Brock Nelson, the Islanders made their best shot and weren't able to keep him. They did make offers.
I would ask any of our listeners how many times they broke up with someone and then they got back together, and did they realize it was a bad decision? It's just, there's a reason why, timing, everything else. And in this case, it doesn't have to be that, they didn't really like each other. But no, I'm trying to think, when was the last player who got traded and then re-signed with the team? It gets talked about every year. It doesn't happen very often. I don't think it should happen very often. And I will sell on both not happening.
You touched on them really briefly, but considering the injury to Hughes and then the moves that they actually made / kind of the moves they didn't make, no team had a more puzzling deadline than the Devils. Greg, is you going to buy or sell on that? Or do you think there's someone out there who you raised an eyebrow at more?
Well, it's not just Hughes, man. Siegenthaler's out for the year. That's brutal. Hamilton's injured. Like, if you're Tom Fitzgerald, they know internally what their health is of their team. At that point, are you going to go out and buy more and give up assets to what? Make the playoffs and lose in the first round? Like, I think New Jersey, unfortunately, injuries kind of limited them to making any sort of moves, because you're not going to win, multiple rounds in the playoffs without Jack Hughes. And then if Siegenthaler isn't in the playoffs, like, he is such an underrated, he is so good. And then Hamilton, like, I just think they had no choice to kind of do the middle. They brought in Dumoulin, but that's it. Like, I don't know. I wasn't expecting much more.
Not for nothing, and not to triple down on this, but you might not win multiple rounds in the playoffs with Jack Hughes.
Yeah.
So I never understood why some people kept playing up, oh, the Devils are going to be super aggressive at the deadline in spite of the Jack Hughes injury. This team didn't make sense to me before. I never viewed them in a contender light. They're a playoff team. They're a typical 6, 7, 8 seed that could be an interesting team to play against. And I like what they're building there. But I think about the New Jersey Devils in the same class that I think about the Minnesota Wild, whose GM was very honest with everyone at the deadline afterwards, saying it's not our time yet. That's a direct quote. There will be a time that we go do this, but it's not right now. And that's the spot that I always saw New Jersey in. I maybe I'm just viewing it differently than everyone else. I think they're a pretender, not a contender.
Yeah.
And then, by the way, after all that said, I know Jason's boy Jonathan Kovacevic, he got his $20 million, but can someone explain Brian Dumoulin for a second?
Yeah, that one does make sense to me. I didn't get it. I guess they knew
if you're not going to do it, then don't do it, and just don't trade extra assets for.
Well, I think they knew, right? Siegenthaler was out at that point, right? Because I don't think he was announced when that trade was made. But yeah, for a second, hey, good return, man.
That's going to be like the 45th pick or something. Like, that's like Like, do we need to remind everyone that the Montreal Canadiens got Lane Hudson 62nd? That's going to be like the 45th pick or 47th or 48th pick. Like, it's going to be decent.
Yeah. Okay, one more. It's not a question, but just you guys talked about Jack Roslovic. So he got the Rolex, obviously. He's back to wearing number 96. And the Canes Pro Shop put out a thing the other day saying if you bought a Mikko Rantanen jersey, they will change the name bar for you. So now Jack Roslovic also might have one of the more popular jerseys in Carolina. The guy just keeps winning.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's good. All right, that is a wrap on this week's edition of Buy or Sell, brought to you by Bet365.
Okay, let's talk about some other perplexing deadline trades.
Okay.
Should we talk about Josh Norris and Dylan Cozens?
Well, I like that trade for Ottawa. I mean, yeah, for Ottawa.
Yeah, I get it for Ottawa. I don't understand it for Buffalo. So, okay,
Dude.
let's unpack it. Let's say that we all agree, if we can all agree, that Josh Norris is the more steady high-end producer, more consistent high-end producer in the trade, correct?
Yeah, he is better offensively, yes.
Well, not just better offensively, but just a more consistent presence. Like when he's in the lineup, he produces. But that's the big caveat to the trade, which is not many other teams in the league. And this is an exact quote to me from an NHL GM. Can't trade for a guy with a mashed potato for a shoulder. He's had 3 different operations on the same shoulder.
Oh, I know.
And so you're going to give up Cozens and a second-round pick to take on that risk?
Hey, and Gilbert, I'm telling you, Ottawa needed a little bit of extra grease on the back end. I like that part of the trade as well. Cozens, like if you look in Ottawa, Stützle's clearly their number 1 center. So it's obvious, right? So they had Norris and they had Pinto. And you mentioned Norris's shoulder, Frank. I really think it impacts how he plays because he can't play inside as much anymore because it's shoulder. Like Oscar Kleppbaum, who had something similar basically his whole career, right? Ended up having to retire at 28 years of age. And you hope that doesn't happen to Josh Norris, but shoulders, they're not an official joint, right? So once it gets buggered, man, it can be a real problem depending on how it goes. So I agree with you. I think, but this just illustrates what we talked about. Buffalo, the experience or inexperience of their management team continues to come to the forefront for me because Josh Norris on paper has more skill, yes, but how many games is he going to play? Right? Like he's 2 years older than, so he's been around too many.
I don't even think it's fair to say on paper has more skill because Dylan Cozens has a 31-goal, 68-point season under his belt. I just said more consistent. But now if you take Dylan Cozens out of a brutal environment in Buffalo and you put him on a team with a chance to make the playoffs, how much more do you get out of him?
Lots. He's a fiery guy. Like you have Tkachuk now on one line in Ottawa and Cozens on the net. And then you got Shane Pinto. Like I really like them down the middle in Ottawa. I think Stützle is a legit number 1. I love that trade for them. And I think it helps them on the back end as well. And this is just another move by Buffalo. Like, sorry, Sabre fans, like I feel for Sabre fans, but to me, that's just another wrong direction move.
Well, and I guess that's the next question I would ask is why did you feel that you had to make that trade on Friday? Teams have been calling about Dylan Cozens since November. You mean to tell me between November and Friday, that's the best deal that you got? And if so, if that is the best deal that you got, what's the impetus to make it now? You're not making the playoffs. Might as well wait and see what you can get in the summer. I don't care how badly Dylan Cozens wants to get out of there or how many times people are calling about him. That's the best trade you could make in this moment. And why on Friday? What did it for you that pushed it over the top to say, I'm going to give up who in the end could be the better player and the second round pick to do it?
No, definitely the healthier player, right? Like best ability is dependability, right? And right now, Cozens, if I'm wagering who's going to play more games over the next 5 years, I think it's an easy wager on Cozens.
Agree.
Yeah. No, I like that trade for Ottawa, man. I think that's huge. And then they got that massive win on the weekend. Brady Tkachuk is, pretty fired up after the game with the crowd. What about the Rangers?
Also some collateral damage to that because Tkachuk is upset losing a really close friend in Norris.
Yeah. But you know what? If they win, and they get to the playoffs, I think that eliminates itself pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. Well, going to be interesting. And I think we should touch on it quickly because Penguins fans were all over me last episode when I mentioned that the Luke Schenn trade with Tommy Novak for Bunting. Oh man, I wanted to call him Anthony Beauvillier, but it's another B, Michael Bunting. I said at the time, this is one of the dumbest trades in the history of the sport. And I'm going to hold true to that. And here's why. All these Penguins fans were tweeting at me, oh, how do you feel now after getting a 2nd and a 4th round pick for Luke Schenn? Here's the truth and the true inside baseball here, if you really want it and you can handle it. Luke Schenn was acquired by Pittsburgh because they thought he was a throw into the deal and they didn't know that he had any actual value on the market. God's honest truth right there. And if Kyle Dubas says otherwise, he's a flat out liar.
Well, I'll say this because I said at the time of the trade, I said, to me, I love this trade for Pittsburgh because I thought they'd flip Luke Schenn right away. And they did.
What we both said.
And I talk about Nashville. Like Barry Trotz is an unbelievable coach. But why are you trading Tommy Novak straight up for Bunting? I think I wouldn't have made that trade. Then you throw in Luke Schenn, and now the other team that gets a 2nd and a 4th, like that is a horrific trade for
Teams
Nashville.
were calling Nashville on Luke Schenn for weeks. Winnipeg thought they had him before he went to Pittsburgh.
I don't understand. I don't understand.
And Pittsburgh thought that he was, again, just a throw into the deal. They weren't looking at it like, oh, this is an amazing flip opportunity. That's what it ended up being. But that's not what they told people when they went into it.
How could they not? That seems odd, but
they flew him to Vegas.
Well, I saw that part. I was like, that's not a good look.
They flew him to Vegas and they were planning on playing him. They did not know. I'm telling you right now, they did not know. And again, if anyone says otherwise, liar.
Yeah. Well,
ends
up being good for them. But the Preds, that one, I think that one stings the Preds for sure. The Winnipeg Jets, what'd you make of their deadline? They didn't get the second line center, Brock Nelson, but they got 2 pieces. Well, what do you make of the Jets when you can, and is it still really good, or because of what Dallas and Colorado did, maybe it doesn't, although they're only probably going to face one of those teams anyway, so maybe it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I don't know that it matters that much. I think without question, it would have been way more ideal for Winnipeg to get a second line center. Brock Nelson, as mentioned, wasn't going to waive to go to Canada anyway. And once you got past Nelson with Gord also off the board, I don't think there was a true second line center left. And with all due respect to Scott Lawton, I think he's a 3C or a winger. So that played itself out the way that it did. I think Winnipeg wisely just went another direction. And I think it is possible to say that their team, I don't know how much they significantly improved, but let's be real. There are injuries that pop up, and they're a deeper team now than they were 2 weeks ago. And that's okay.
No, it's fair. No, I like the Jets. I still like the Jets a lot. And I like them even better that they finished first because, you know what, they're going to get the number 8 seed in the West, which right now clearly looks like the best first round opponent that you'd want to face. I don't think there's much debate on that, although Minnesota, and now if they get Kaprizov back, that's a different story. But Minnesota, for the last 2 months, I think they're 27th or 28th in the NHL in the standings. So you're kind of struggling to put it mildly. So I like Winnipeg's, even though there wasn't the splashy moves. I like their team. I like their team all year long. I think they're still smarting from last year's playoff embarrassment, and I expect them to be very ready in the first round. And I think Winnipeg they're going to make sure that they stay ahead of Dallas here for first, because then you avoid both of them.
In the same vein, what did you make of Washington's deadline?
You know what? I wish they would have got a third line center, to be honest. I think it would have been great. That's all they really needed. Beauvillier helps their third line, sure. But I think that, Scott Lawton, I said it all along, that would have been the perfect fit. But they obviously maybe didn't want to pay that price.
Vegas does very little.
Very little. Riley Smith.
Well, I mean, Riley Smith, based on the way that he's played this year, it's little. But if it's Riley Smith rejuvenated being back in Vegas, that's a different story. But The one surprise for me was the LA Kings only getting Andrei Kuzmenko. Have you just waved the white flag on your season? Have you basically announced to everyone, we don't think we're good enough?
It was odd, but when I look at who was available, like they weren't going to go after Nelson. They didn't need Nelson, right? You'd mentioned Rantanen, and I don't know how serious they ever got in that conversation or not. But was there another player on the market you would say, hey, that's who they should have got for their team?
I think sending some message to your team, hey, we believe in you. We think you could do something. Like, you mean to tell me that the energy that a Brandon Tanev could add to that team doesn't help?
Well, I think the one thing the Kings need, Frank, is a right shot on the power play. And so I think they're hoping Kuzma, because their power play again. And if you look at their playoffs the last few years, their special teams is what's cost them in that series against them. Like, well, their penalty kill has to be way better because it was like 55 and 60%, for goodness sakes. But their power play needs a right shot. I don't know if Kuzmenko is a guy who might be good for 2 weeks. And then you're like, so I agree. It doesn't look great. That's totally valid. But in theory, they do need a right shot and maybe something to spur their power play, because it's pedestrian at best. It's never a weapon.
So at the time of the trade, I'm just double checking to make sure that this is fact before I say it. But Andrei Kuzmenko had the most points since the trade that involved Frost and Farabee.
That's right. Yeah.
Which is kind of amazing to think about. He had 5 points in 7 games as a Flyer or something like that. 5 points in 13 games, whatever it was.
Yeah. Not a lot. Yeah. None of them.
Not a lot, but still more than the other two guys who were obviously worth a lot more. Kuzmenko just to throw in on the deal. And the Flyers end up getting a 3rd round pick back for Kuzmenko. I know they retained, but I think at one point the Flames were hoping for a 5th or a 6th. Kuzmenko had 2 goals and 5 points in 7 games as a Flyer.
Yeah.
Frost now has 5 points as a Flame.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious to see what else. That's why I put Edmonton in the category of Washington. Vegas didn't get any better. LA didn't really get any better. Edmonton, now they don't have Trent Frederick yet, but when he comes in, he'll add. Jones has given them something they never had all year long. It's a pulse on their 4th line physically. And Jake Wallman is a massive upgrade over John Klingberg right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the big test and key to the Edmonton Oilers season will be how good is Evander Kane when he comes back. Because if he's a game changer, which he can be when he's motivated, they're laughing at the end of the day.
I think all he has to be is like a quality 3rd line player, and it can help them. Because another one thing
he's going to be an immediate 2nd line winger. Immediate.
Well, if he does that, that'll be unreal. The thing about Edmonton, Frank, is like for 3 months, they're the best team in the league. And then they had a terrible stretch of 11 games where they were awful. And a lot of it was their 5-on-5 play. And a lot of it was their best players on the ice 5-on-5. I can't see that continuing for them. And that's why, like to me, one of their wild cards too is like, could Victor Arvidsson get a pulse? He finally scored a nice goal, probably maybe his 2nd really nice goal all year, that, cause he's been a real disappointment. That Edmonton still has a lot of their struggles. Everybody focuses on the goaltending, and sure, but when the team was good, the goaltending was fine. Lately, their last 11 games, they've been terrible defensively, and their goaltending isn't any better. And I think it's like Stuart Skinner's not an elite goalie, so you can't expect him to be an elite goalie, and he doesn't have to be elite if the team's good. He showed that last year in the playoffs. He had a hiccup against Vancouver, no question. Go look at his numbers in the final 15 games of the playoffs. And he outdueled Jake Ottinger in the conference final. So he doesn't need to be Hellebuck, Schuster, because he can't. He's not that goalie. If he just is consistent, I still think Edmonton's got a real good chance. And they're not in the Central. So you know what? They have an advantage. They're either going to play LA or Minnesota in the 1st round.
Okay, so one team that wakes up today on Monday post-deadline outside of the playoff picture is the Vancouver Canucks. What do you make of their deadline?
I don't think they got better.
How could they have?
Yeah, I don't think they did. So the Hughes injury, and now this is kind of ongoing, right? Like, he comes back and now he's like that. That's a real blow to them. Like he's such a key integral part of their team that if they manage to get in, Frank, I don't see them surprising. And right now, like offensively, I don't know if you I watched some of Saturday night's game. My goodness, they generate so little. Sorry, Sunday night. They generate so little offensively right now. Like last night against the Stars, it was just like it. And if you go back to the only reason they beat Nashville in the first round last year is because Nashville's power play was beyond terrible, but Vancouver just doesn't generate offense. And I'm not even talking where they're getting great chances. They just don't create enough chances. Never mind finish. So yeah, if Vancouver gets in, I think there'll be a speed bump for the Jets.
But what do you make of the Besser situation? I think it was in poor taste, their public messaging. I really do. I don't care how the negotiations went. This is a guy who's been extremely loyal to your team. And then even if the offers were shit, I just don't see any reason to go out and say that about the player. Even though fans are criticizing you saying, oh, why didn't you move Besser at the deadline if you're not re-signing him? How come this organization's so inept and can't get picks back? No matter what, as an organization and a group of leaders, your job is to protect your players. That's it. Period. Full stop. So to say, you wouldn't believe, basically in parentheses, how bad these offers were for Brock Besser, just say nothing. Just say we couldn't get it done. Just say nothing.
Yeah. Well,
now you go through that. You piss off your player who wanted to stay, obviously won't be any longer. And then he shows up for the game on Sunday and there's not an A on his jersey. Yikes. I don't like that at all.
Dude, I'm telling you, I don't think there is a more dysfunctional organization right now than Vancouver.
Really? Buffalo says, hold my beer.
Fair point. But when I look at just, there's constant drama. And as much as they like to blame that it starts externally, most of it starts internally and then just keeps seeping out and becomes public, but it's internal. And to me, they got to do a real deep internal dive on their organization and how they treat people, number one, because I think that until that changes, Frank, the Canucks are going nowhere.
I just think it's a really bad look. Regardless of whatever the offers were, regardless of how your negotiations went, players read that. They hear it, they see it, they talk to each other, they internalize it. How do you think Brock Besser feels when reporters are coming up to him after and saying, Ben, did you hear what your GM said about you today? Yeah. So much so to the point where all class, and he's been all class since he's gotten there, despite the trade rumors, despite his personal off-ice tragedies, all this stuff that's been a huge part of his life that he's lived in Vancouver. And that's how you're going to treat him on the way out? I think that's really disappointing.
Because to me, the easiest thing would have been to say, we think Brock is more valuable to our team. We want to make the playoffs and we want to re-sign him. End of discussion.
Period. That's it.
Very simple. Very simple. Well, it's going to be fascinating to see how some of these players, who do you think, Frank, for fun in the regular season, which trade deadline acquisition has the biggest impact in the regular season for his new team?
Regular season? Brandon Carlo.
Ooh. Brandon Carlo. Wow. Wasn't expecting that one. I like it. All right.
It'd be so easy to just say Mikko Rantanen. I can't do that.
No. Actually,
we didn't talk about Carlo at all, really.
No. I think, hey, Boston retained 15% too on a division rival. That's kind of crazy to me. But I honestly think that Charlie Coyle
got 2 first-round picks for it, so that's why they did it.
I think Charlie Coyle is going to have a sneaky good time in Colorado.
It's a good place to have a good time.
Frankie, have a good one, man. It's a busy pod. It's episode 365 brought to you by Bet365. Use the promo code NATION Get in the game. Enjoy the NHL. We will talk to everyone on Thursday. Have a good one.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Saravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.